Hi, and welcome to English-Fabule. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
New rules for trade came to Vietnam. On July 3, 2025, news spread fast. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, said there would be new taxes on goods. These new taxes are called tariffs. One new tariff was 20%. This means that goods made in Vietnam and sent to the United States would cost 20% more. This was a very big problem for Vietnam. Exports to the U.S. are a very large part of Vietnam's money. This change was a huge challenge for Vietnam's economy. There was also another tariff. This one was 40%. This tariff was for goods that came from China first. These goods were then sent to Vietnam for some work, and after that they went to the United States. Many factories in Vietnam used this way to send goods. This 40% tariff caused many worries. It showed that the global way of making things was now harder. Big companies felt this problem quickly. For example, factories making Nike shoes in Vietnam started to worry. Vietnam makes half of all Nike shoes for the world. These new taxes would make it harder to make a profit. Samsung also has many factories in Vietnam. Vietnam sells many Samsung phones to other countries. Apple also has many companies that make parts in Vietnam. All these big factories faced new difficulties. Vietnam had become very successful in its economy. It grew very fast. But this sudden change from the United States put Vietnam's success at risk. It was a big question for Vietnam's future. Would Vietnam's economy still grow strong, or would these new tariffs stop its growth? 2. How Vietnam grew. After the war ended in 1975, Vietnam was a very poor country. Its economy was broken. For many years, the country tried to grow using a planned economy, but this did not work well. There was not enough food, and many people were poor. Then, in December 1986, the government started big changes called Đổi Mới. This means renovation. These changes opened Vietnam's economy to the world. Private businesses could grow, and foreign companies were welcome. Farmers could now own land and sell their crops freely. This was a big change, and it helped the country a lot. Vietnam quickly became an attractive place for foreign companies to build factories. The country had a large number of young workers. Most of these workers could read and write thanks to the government's focus on education. Also, Vietnam's location in Southeast Asia was very good for trade. The government helped by creating special areas where businesses got tax breaks. They also built better roads and ports. Many big companies, first from places like Japan and South Korea, then from America and Europe, came to Vietnam. They built factories to make things like clothes, shoes, and electronics. Vietnam's economy grew fast, with GDP increasing by more than 6% each year for 30 years. Millions of people moved out of poverty. A big reason for Vietnam's growth as a factory for the world happened during President Donald Trump's first time in office. During the trade conflict between the United States and China, many companies moved their production from China. They looked for new places, and Vietnam was a top choice. Companies like Nike moved a lot of their shoemaking to Vietnam. Samsung also moved much of its smartphone production there. By 2025, Vietnam made half of all Nike shoes and was the world's second-largest phone exporter. This growth was amazing. Vietnam's exports to the United States grew from a small amount in 1995 to nearly $137 billion by 2024. This meant that selling goods to the American market became very important for Vietnam's economy. In fact, exports to the U.S. made up 30% of all the goods and services Vietnam produced. This success depended a lot on America. 3. A difficult choice. Vietnam's foreign policy has a special name: bamboo diplomacy. Like a bamboo tree, Vietnam tries to be strong and stand on its own. But it can also bend and be flexible when big winds blow. This means Vietnam wants to be friends with many powerful countries. For many years, Vietnam has managed this difficult balancing act very well, especially with the United States and its large neighbor, China. Vietnam has a unique history with both nations. With the United States, it moved from being bitter enemies to important partners. This took careful work. With China, Vietnam shares a long border and close economic ties, even with past problems like a short border war in 1979. China is a major source of parts and investments for Vietnamese factories. The new tariffs from the United States now make this balancing act very hard. President Donald Trump's administration announced new tariffs, including a 40% tariff on goods that come from China but are finished in Vietnam. This rule puts Vietnam in a difficult position. It must choose how to act without angering one powerful country. Vietnamese leaders tried to prevent or change these tariffs. Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh talked with American officials offering to buy more American products. Many American companies with factories in Vietnam, like Nike and Samsung, also spoke out. They told the U.S. government that the tariffs would hurt them and American shoppers. These efforts helped lower some tariffs, but the 40% on transshipped goods remained. China is also watching Vietnam closely. Chinese companies have invested much in Vietnam. The new U.S. tariffs mean Vietnam must try to prove where its products truly originate. This makes it hard for Vietnamese factories to keep using Chinese parts if they want to sell to America. If Vietnam tries too hard to please the U.S., it might upset China, a vital neighbor and trading partner. This situation puts Vietnam on a very narrow path. It must bend with the new American trade rules without breaking its important ties with China. Vietnam's bamboo diplomacy is being tested greatly. The country needs to find a way to keep its independence and its economic growth. This difficult choice will shape Vietnam's future for many years. 4. The view from America. From America, the government saw the trade with Vietnam as very unfair. Vietnam sold many more goods to the United States than it bought. This large difference in trade was called a trade surplus. It grew very quickly. By 2024, Vietnam's trade surplus with the U.S. had reached over $123 billion. This was a big concern for Washington. President Donald Trump's policy had a clear goal: to protect American jobs and factories. He believed that many trade agreements in the past had caused American workers to lose their jobs. People in industrial states who supported President Trump blamed these trade deals for factory closures and lower wages. During his 2024 campaign, President Trump promised to be even stronger on trade issues. The new tariffs on Vietnamese goods were a direct result of this promise. They showed that his administration was ready to use its economic power to change global trade. A major worry for the U.S. government was the issue of transshipment. This referred to goods that were originally from China, but then sent to Vietnam. After some assembly or finishing work in Vietnam, these products were then shipped to the United States as made in Vietnam. This method allowed Chinese goods to avoid the higher tariffs that the U.S. had placed on them. Officials in the Trump administration saw this as strong evidence of unfair competition. They believed that many Chinese companies had moved parts of their operations to Vietnam simply to keep selling to the U.S. market without paying the tariffs. This, they felt, harmed American businesses and workers. The specific 40% tariff on transshipped goods was put in place to stop this practice and remove any financial benefit from it. However, this policy faced strong disagreement from many American companies. Important business groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which represents hundreds of American firms with operations in Vietnam, spoke out against the tariffs. They argued that these tariffs would lead to higher prices for American consumers. They also warned that the complex supply chains, which connect factories to stores around the world, would be severely disrupted. Big American retailers, such as Walmart and Target, were very clear in their opposition. They said that raising prices would hurt their businesses, and that Vietnam was a legitimate and efficient place for manufacturing. They felt Vietnam's role was due to its skilled workers and good costs, not just to avoid tariffs. Even within parts of the U.S. government, there were concerns. Some worried that the tariffs could cause inflation or damage America's relationship with Vietnam, a growing strategic partner in Southeast Asia. Despite these disagreements and warnings, President Trump's administration remained firm. They believed that these tough actions were necessary to create a more balanced and fair international trade system that would ultimately benefit American industry and workers. 5. A new plan. Vietnamese factories quickly began to make new plans. They needed to find different places to get their materials and parts. Companies started looking for new suppliers in other countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Bangladesh. This was a very complex task for businesses. Many factories also invested in new machines, using more automation like robots. This helped lower the cost of making goods. Some factories even decided to move their production entirely to new countries. This was a big change, as many factories had just moved to Vietnam from China. Businesses also began to redesign products to use fewer parts from China, a process needing much time and money. This effort to change where materials came from and where products were made was called supply chain diversification. It was a huge undertaking for the entire country's industry. The Vietnamese government also created new rules. These rules helped to prove where products truly came from. The government wanted to show that goods were legitimately made in Vietnam, not just finished there after coming from China. These new rules meant much more paperwork for companies. They also meant more checks at the border by customs officials before products could be shipped. Vietnamese officials said these new measures would make trade clearer and fairer for everyone. They were careful not to state that these changes were only a direct response to the United States' pressure. The government tried hard to follow the new rules from the United States without upsetting China. China is Vietnam's biggest neighbor and a very important country for trade and parts. Many Vietnamese factories still get important components from China, so angering China could cause even more problems. This was a very delicate balance for Vietnam's leaders. For businesses in Vietnam, adapting was a huge challenge, perhaps the biggest they had faced in years. Finding new, reliable suppliers was not easy. It took a long time to find and check new factories in other countries to ensure quality and price. Changing how products were made was a slow and expensive process. Getting new parts meant changing factory lines, getting new machines, and training workers again. This all added significantly to costs. Small businesses especially worried about their future. They often did not have many financial resources to make these big, sudden changes quickly. The new trade rules meant many difficult decisions for every company. Businesses had to adapt very fast or risk losing their important markets, especially in the United States. This situation put a lot of pressure on the entire Vietnamese economy and its workers. 6. A risky business. The new tariffs show that Vietnam's way of growing its economy is risky. For many years, Vietnam's success came from selling many goods to the United States. About 30% of Vietnam's total economic output, or GDP, comes from exports to America. This means Vietnam depends very much on one big country for its money. This is dangerous because trade rules can change very quickly. President Trump's decision to add tariffs proved this, showing how fast things can change. The old idea of trade, where countries traded freely and safely, seems to be ending. Before, many believed that all countries would become more connected through trade. This was thought to make big trade problems unlikely. But this belief was not correct. The actions of the Trump administration show that a country's economic choices can be changed by political decisions. This means that access to big markets can be used as a tool by powerful countries. This also means the world might become more separate with different economic groups. Countries might have to choose sides, which makes free trade harder for everyone. For Vietnam, this is a big problem for its future growth. The country became rich by making things for others, especially for American buyers. Now, Vietnam must think differently about how it will grow. It cannot rely only on selling goods to other countries. Vietnam may need to change its whole plan for the economy. It could try to sell more goods to its own people inside Vietnam. This means building a stronger local market. It could also try to trade more with countries close by, like those in Southeast Asia. For example, working more closely with ASEAN countries could help make trade stronger within the region. This would make Vietnam less dependent on one big market for its prosperity. This change will be hard. Millions of people in Vietnam work in factories that make goods for export. Their jobs depend on this trade. If these factories struggle, it can affect many families. However, Vietnam has shown in its history that it can change and adapt to difficult situations. It has strong people and smart ideas. The country will need to use these qualities to find new ways to grow its economy. It will need to make its trade more spread out, find new technologies, and work better with its neighbors. This is a very important time for Vietnam's economic future as it faces the challenge of a changing global trade system. 7. A problem for the world. The new tariffs from the United States are not just a problem for Vietnam. Many other countries are watching what is happening closely. These nations also sell many goods to the U.S. They are worried similar trade barriers might affect them next. This situation clearly shows that global trade is changing for everyone. For many years, countries traded easily. Goods moved across borders with fewer rules. Companies made parts in one country, assembled them in another, and sold products worldwide. But now, this old way of business is much harder. The trade conflict between the U.S. and Vietnam, and earlier between the U.S. and China, points to a new future for global commerce. It seems the world might be separating into different economic groups. One large group could be centered around the United States and its allies. Another group might form around China and its economic partners. This means nations may soon need to choose which group they belong to. For example, a country trading a lot with China might find it harder to sell goods to the U.S., and a country selling to the U.S. might face challenges with China. This splitting of the world economy is a big challenge for many nations, especially those that are not very powerful. They need to trade with many partners to grow their economies. But if the world divides into separate trade groups, it will be harder for them to trade freely. This limits their economic choices and can slow down their growth. Countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and Mexico built their economies on exporting goods. Now, they see trade rules can change quickly, without warning. This makes planning for the future very difficult for their businesses and governments. They must find new ways to adapt, which is costly and slow. The old idea that all countries can trade openly is becoming less certain. Governments are now looking more at their own country's economy first, rather than global cooperation. This trend, called economic nationalism, means each country wants to protect its own jobs and factories above all else. President Donald Trump's actions against Vietnam show this new thinking. His policy aims to make trade fair for American workers, even if it creates problems for other countries. This pressure forces other nations to rethink their trade strategies. They can no longer rely on stable rules from the past. The outcome for Vietnam will be very important for the rest of the world. It will show how countries can survive in an economy where trade is not always free. It will also test if smaller countries can stay independent when powerful nations create new economic boundaries. This is a significant problem not just for Vietnam, but for the entire world's trading system. 8. The bamboo and the bulldozer. This story shows a big difference in how two sides act. On one side is the American approach to trade. It is like a powerful bulldozer. A bulldozer moves forward strongly, changing things in its path quickly and directly. This is how American trade policy, especially under President Donald Trump, has often worked. It aims to protect American jobs and factories directly and quickly, even if it changes long-standing global trade agreements and relationships. The goal is to make trade fair for America, based on their view. On the other side is Vietnam's approach. This is often compared to flexible bamboo. Bamboo bends in strong winds but does not break easily. Its roots stay firm in the ground. This bamboo diplomacy helps Vietnam stay independent and strong, even when big, powerful countries try to pull it in different directions. Vietnam has a long and difficult history of facing many challenges and surviving them. It has dealt with periods of colonial rule, devastating wars, and economic isolation. Through it all, the country has learned to stand firm on its principles while being flexible in its actions. However, this new trade problem is very different from past challenges Vietnam has faced. It is not a military conflict, but a complex economic one about how the world trades and shares goods. Global trade rules are changing fast, and major economic powers like the United States and China are having strong disagreements. Vietnam is caught directly in the middle of these tensions. This situation is a very modern problem, highlighting how deeply connected global economies are and how quickly supply chains and trade policies can be reshaped. The outcome of this conflict will be very important for the whole world. It will show if smaller, developing countries can keep their own path when powerful nations act so strongly. It will also show the future of global trade and international politics. Will countries be forced to choose one side over another, creating separate economic groups? Or can a country like Vietnam continue its flexible way, surviving big pressures without breaking its economic ties or independence. This difficult situation in Vietnam offers a clear look at how trade and politics might unfold for everyone in the coming years. Considering all this, what do you think will happen to countries like Vietnam that are caught between two major economic powers?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.